All right, welcome to Lecture 8. This is the fourth unit in Structure and Operations, and we'll be focusing today on finance, risk, and security. Here's the agenda. We're going to, first we'll recap the field trip that we took to the MACC data center last week, and take a look at a few things that I wanted to review there. Uche will do the reading reviews and discussion, and then we'll have a lecture on the topics I mentioned in discussion, and then a budget exercise. We'll actually work with some real IT department budgets for operations and for capital projects. We have our mid-course survey that follows that, and then a wrap-up and next steps, and hopefully we'll have some time for some team meetings at the end. Okay, so let's get started. First, the recap and exercise about the data center from last week. Thanks to Hoojun, who took some wonderful photos. This is, of course, Brian, who works with Kevin Lake, and who gave us the tour of the data center in about the center of the MACC. So again, you get a sense of just how large a space this was. And then this particular item I found online was something we couldn't see. And if you take a minute to guess what this is, I'll pause. And this is actually power backup. It's a momentum machine, a flywheel that turns and is able to generate electricity for 1 minute. So in case of a power failure and before the generators come up, this provides that uninterrupted power supply, or UPS, through a newer technology than batteries. This works through a flywheel principle. So rather interesting technology. You'll see this in the video that's coming up. So there's two videos we want to look at. One that posted on the MACC, and then the second one we'll look at is on inside the Google data center. I will pause here so you can watch these two videos, and then we'll come back for a discussion about it. Okay, so we're back, and the key questions here that we talked about during the class time is, so what's the same in these two data centers? What's different? And what did you hear or see about security? And why should an IT manager care about this? So the things that we identified as being the same in the two data centers were the fact that they both had servers, they both had cooling systems, they both had some level of security, backup power, power distribution units, and they certainly had employees who were on the floor. Some of the differences, though, so there was a different cooling approach that was used in the Google Center from the there was no raised floor in the Google Center. There was a dedicated security gate, and were also some biometrics that were in the Google Center. There was also custom servers that were built for Google, and custom racks that were also designed for those servers. They had a rather elaborate disk drive disposal, which crushed and shredded disk drives that were past their useful life. They also had aspects of carbon offsets, which were interesting, and a different wire organization. And people noticed that there was one of the differences was there were pets in the Google Center. The people had brought their pets to work, and there were scooters for getting around, and also games. Typical Silicon Valley type environment, even for a highly secure data center. The security levels, what we saw there was that the level of security differed by location. So as you got more into the center of the data center, there were additional hurdles that you had to pass through security-wise. Some joke that the moat around the outside of Google had a sign to say, "Beware of the alligators." So postulating that that was another level of security. They had guards 24/7 in the Google Center, and they did not have in the UM Center. And then they had a separate info security team. That may also exist at UM, but it was not present in the same place in the same video. And then, as I mentioned, in terms of biometrics, Google had retina scanners and pods that you had to navigate through in order to get inside. So quite a number of intersections and quite a number of differences about the two. And the reason an IT manager should care about this, because an IT manager, IT department is responsible for delivering a service level to the organization. And so the amount of backups that are available and the having thought through there being no single points of failure, so which also factored into the tier ratings that we also talked about. So running a smooth operation, even though it may be invisible to the organization. And in fact, I think only 3 of us had seen a data center from the inside before. And so we, in fact, operate a number of years while at the University of Michigan, and of course beyond with the Google centers, never having seen all of the IT operations that are below the waterline, but all of which have to be dependable and run smoothly in order to have the user experiences that we have had using the tech. So now back to the presentation slides. So one of the key takeaways about IT operations was this was the part of the stack we saw in an earlier lecture, having these elements, and that an IT manager had to worry about each of these, all the way from applications that the users would touch down to the networking, connecting things. But then also, as was evident from touring the data center, there was physical security that had to be managed. There was climate and the air control in the building, and then the electrical backup as well. So some fairly basic utility types of items the IT manager also had to manage. And a key assumption from this stack from lecture 5 is that this is an on-premises data center. So all of these factors would be in the building that housed the servers and server racks and network equipment. And then the security here, as I already mentioned, is physical security, providing the barriers and checkpoints to ensure that people were not in places they shouldn't be and have an opportunity to cause damage to any of the machines. So the key question to take away from this this part of the exercise is for IT managers to ask, where are my single points of failure? Do I have backup at each of these levels that are in the stack? And then what is my B plan if the A plan fails? Like for electricity, where of course we saw the powers that came in from the local utility, and UM's case, Detroit DTE, and then we saw the backup in terms of the flywheels and the generators that they showed us in freezing cold weather outside. These different tier levels, which are set by the Uptime Institute. So the data center that we looked at was a tier 2. And notice that these percentages of uptimes don't look like they vary much as you read from, they're all 99 point something, but yet the number of minutes of downtime then that is allowable for a entire year is quite a bit different, all the way from 25 minutes at the tier 4 level down to 28 hours downtime at the tier 1 level. So as you pay for greater levels of redundancy, you have greater levels of reliability and dependability. And again, the Mac data center was at tier 2, and also the medical school, we were told, is a tier 3 data center. As the tiers get larger, the redundancy gets more significant. Okay, Uche also presented a summary of the readings. I am just going to skip through his slides rather quickly since he's not here to record this at this session. So these are the readings that we covered from Phoenix, Be the Business, and then we read an article on the 18 biggest data breaches of the century. So she did takeaways and key questions for each of the readings: Phoenix Project, Be the Business, and then the data breaches article as well. Ending with a discussion, as we typically have as a practice, on 3 questions pulled from the list of questions in the preceding slides: advantages and disadvantages of linking IT with operational objectives, proper way of convincing CEOs and CFOs for following your idea if the price is substantial, and does measuring happiness based on increased volume and quality of sales equate to the happiness of the workers? And so we had a fairly lively discussion about those, but I'll leave them for you to think about, and you can pause the video at this point and do so. Okay, let me add a few observations to the readings. First of all, it was this chart that Bill Palmer in the Phoenix Project story drew after they met with Dick, who's the COO/CFO of Parts Unlimited. And when they asked him, how does he measure the business success and what does he consider key goals of the business? And so here the key business performance measures are down the left-hand side. And then they went through an exercise of listing, well, which IT systems do they rely on in order to accomplish these goals? And then the third column, what business risk is due to IT if these systems fail. And then they've got some more work to do in terms of controls. And so you notice Phoenix is one of the systems on this list, which is what we're reading about in the Phoenix Project. You can take a break at this point in the video. We're going to press on. So into the lecture for today, we have been covering these 3 units: strategy, alignment, structure, operations, staffing, and people. And today we finished the structure operations unit with understanding finance, risk, security, in context. I took a survey of the class by a show of hands, and about a third were familiar with some of the financial concepts or accounting concepts. But in fact, there were quite a few who did not feel as comfortable with finance. And so this lecture is targeted in between. In the Phoenix Project, we've been tracking our progress through the book in terms of the chunks of reading that we've done each week. We're now through chapter 29, so we're through the first 2 parts of the book and about to read the final part in the coming week. And I've been noting some key takeaways, if you will, or key headlines from each of the parts or sections we've been reading. And for this last week, it was really about aligning IT, and particularly the chart we just saw on an earlier slide. How do the IT systems and IT objectives map into the business objectives? So the question for today is, how do we manage risks, security, and finance, as you might suspect from the title? This builds on lecture 5 about how we govern and control IT, but still innovate. And then lecture 6, how do we balance process, speed, and quality, and efficiency for managing projects IT flow. Lecture 7, how do we balance innovation and metrics, good governance, and politics. So these are building upon each other in terms of the structure operations unit, and which we're finishing today. So let me talk about finance. So because more than half the class did not consider themselves familiar with finance and accounting, one of the key questions, especially for technically minded people, is, so is an IT manager a finance manager? I thought that was a separate function. Well, the short answer is yes. And the key reasons are because the IT manager needs to speak the language of senior management, and finance is the language of senior management. And if you're going to persuade the senior management team, which is what we're going to be doing in the projects that we're going to propose to the senior management team at the end of the semester, to convince them to do an IT project, you need to have the numbers straight, and you need to be able to answer their questions, about costs and savings and the like. And many of the big IT projects, they're not trivial investments. These end up being relatively big numbers. And the other observation that I'd like to make is that probably during an IT career, you're going to learn more about finance than in many finance or accounting degree programs, maybe at the associate's level rather than the bachelor's, and certainly not the graduate level. But you're going to learn as much as people who study in these areas. And then short answer number 2 is, hey, this goes with the territory. If you're going to be an IT manager, it's part of your job, whether you're managing a project or you're managing the entire IT enterprise as CIO, you've got to be able to speak this language. Excuse me. So let's talk a little bit about IT budgets. So there are 3 types of budgets that IT manages. The first, for short, is called CapEx, or the capital budget. These are the larger items. So sort of the one-time purchases, can be hardware, software projects, but the expenses are amortized, or they're spread out, if you will, across 3 to 5 years of their useful life. So rather than paying for them all at once on the financial books of the organization, they may spread the cost out across when the capitalized item is used. So servers are a good example. And this is typical in terms of financial management of equipment in organizations, and certainly IT hardware is considered equipment. And then the annual amortization, so the payment you have to make on your books each year, is like a mortgage payment. It's a monthly payment, and that's known as depreciation. So the depreciation is the monthly portion across a 3 or 5 year horizon, and then the depreciation also counts as operating expense, which is the next category, Opex for short. And these are the recurring costs of running IT. And the largest component, as you might expect, in an IT department is the salary costs, consulting, temporary costs of people. Typically over half the IT department's cost. Project budget, this is a portfolio of elective projects, so sort of like the Phoenix project that we've been reading about. And it may be expensed as operating expense, or if larger, they're going to be capitalized in terms of CapEx. And so whether a project is OPEX or CapEx is one of the important financial decisions you make as you go through your budget planning. And then cloud and software as a service applications, this changes the dynamics because more expenses are shifting from CapEx to OPEX as we rent things in the cloud rather than buying them and putting them into data centers. So that's an important change also to be aware of. Now, in terms of CapEx versus OPEX, there are certain decisions that you have to make in terms of what goes on which budget. And the first thing to look at is, well, what's the amount of the cost of either the equipment or the service, and then does it have an expected life, over which its costs should be distributed. So servers, for example, typically have a warranty of 3 years. For disk drives that are spinning disk drives, they may last up to 5 years. And so the expected life is going to be between 3 and 5 years. And why then is this capital budget important to IT managers? Well, your buying power is greater with CapEx. So if it's spread out over 3 to 5 years, then what hits your annual budget is a third of the expense or a fifth of the expense for the longer ones, meaning that you can afford to undertake a bigger project or a bigger purchase because its costs are spread out and it won't inflate your budget to a great degree beyond what the guidelines are for a given year. And then what happens next is, when something is at the end of its depreciation, at the end of those 3 or 5 years, then the CapEx budget's replenished because things roll off of the depreciation schedule as the payments are finished, and then new items can go on. So your buying power then increases by the things that come off the depreciation schedule as well. And then the fact that expenses are smoothed over a longer period. So this is an important aspect of an IT manager's decision-making, understanding how the mechanics of Opex and CapEx work with respect to your hardware, software, and your projects is a key part of what you do. So, and learning about it, therefore, is a basic requirement of being an IT manager. Now, there are a few key ratios that we focus on. So at the International Red Cross and at Save the Children, we looked at these 5 ratios, which was, what was the capital IT budget as a percentage of revenue, the total IT budget as a percent of revenue, what was the IT cost to staff. So if you take the total IT budget and divide it by the number of staff in the organization, what are we paying for IT per person, in other words? What's the staff to IT staff ratio? So if we take a look at the IT headcount, how many, divide that into the total headcount for the organization, what's that ratio? And then an important subset of that is, well, what's the ratio of the total headcount to the help desk staff? So is each help desk person supporting 100 people on average, 75 people? And that's important for managing your help desk and your service ratios as well. Some typical rules of thumb: maintenance, which is an important part of project planning. This is the ongoing project costs, therefore it's Opex, is usually 15%. That pays for some bug fixes and upgrades and people being on call during the lifetime of a custom system or a system that you purchased from a vendor. And then when you're planning projects, contingency, about 15% of the project costs is also typical. And the reason for that is because IT projects vary so much. We'll just look at that in a second. In terms of IT spending, we have a database that we've been growing in the Data for Good Center, and we're looking at these key ratios that I just showed you on the previous slide, going back to actually 2001 is when we started collecting this survey data. And the typical these are nonprofit organizations. Typical nonprofit organization spends about 2.5% to 3% of revenue on IT. Now, how does that compare to for-profit organizations? Well, in North America, according to Gartner research, most corporations will spend in the area of 7.5% of revenue on IT. Of course, if you're a technology company, you're going to be spending more. Financial services typically spends more, but on average, 7.5%, which is near 3 times what it is on the nonprofit side. So managing IT in nonprofits is quite a different animal than managing IT for-profit organizations. In terms of where the spending is, here's a pie chart that shows that we've got, a significant amount of the expense is coming from people expense, staff expense, and then IT maintenance is the other big item, and then the IT projects and depreciation, which is the green one. Those three make up 80% of the IT budget. And so when you're managing the finances of your department, focusing on these three are what make the most sense. And not managing IT across an entire enterprise closely can mean that shadow IT can grow. This is an actual number of a study that we did at the international organization where I worked previously that showed that 53% of the total IT spending in the organization was happening outside of the view of the IT department. And these, because many times things like laptops and consulting was purchased and projects were undertaken as part of grants. And that was something that wasn't seen by the IT department. Rather interesting application was written to determine this by taking a look at all the financial transactions and looking for keywords that indicated that it was most likely an IT-related expense, and therefore it allowed us to come up with this regional IT figure in the green and the headquarter figure in the blue, and then the shadow IT, which we didn't manage, was in the red. And Heller notes the TBMC as an organization that's measuring total IT spending in organizations. And so when you're benchmarking or comparing yourselves to industry averages, it's important to have a complete picture of the IT spending in your organization that you may not be getting just from the IT budget reports, as this study indicated. Estimating project costs. This is a typical breakdown of projects from the total budgets, the expense portion and the capital portion in projects. We categorize projects in the last organization I was with in terms of maintenance projects, compliance projects that we had to do for legal reasons or audit reasons, must do, and then projects that depended on certain studies or were continuing projects from prior years, and then other. We also had some carry forward money, so this is money that was unspent in prior years, and so we fortunately had the ability to apply that as a positive offset on our budget, and then the total amounts that we reported here. So the project portfolio at this organization was $3.5 million, and $500,000 of that was covered by carry forward. And again, we're just reiterating the point that projects have both expense and capital portions. So there are some other important terms that the IT manager needs to know about for finance. A few of them here I'll just take in pairs. Break even, about when, and I'll show you a chart on this in a minute, so I won't spend much time on it now. But when is the cost going to be covered? What month will the savings or the revenue generated by the project are going to cover the fixed cost? Return on investment is another one that's common in IT projects. Return on effort was something that I added to the mix here, where it was a qualitative judgment in terms of, did we believe that we were going to get enough benefits for all of the effort it would take to do that project. And projects that took a tremendous amount of effort but yielded very few benefits, we would tend to put those projects on hold. Total cost of ownership, another important concept for IT finance management. That's the what does it cost to get this system, and including also all the one-time and recurring costs across a time horizon. Usually it was 5 years. And then what it would cost with one major upgrade. So if you put in an ERP system, for example, you'd have to know what the one-time costs were, the recurring costs across each of those 5 years. And then if you had to do a major upgrade in year 5, those costs had to be added to get a true understanding of that total cost of ownership. The other reason why total cost of ownership is important is that sometimes we do a customized software development project, and the argument is, well, it's really low cost, so we'll just do that, and then it ends up having high cost across the years in which it exists. An example of that is we had a system that was developed by one person in our Pakistan office. Developed an HR application in Microsoft Access, which itself should give us pause, but then also convinced the Nepal office and the Philippines office to take on the application as well, and then he left the organization. When the system then had a problem and crashed and needed some fixes and enhancements, I got a call from the regional manager in Asia Pacific asking about, what we can do about the system, and my first question was, what system? It was a shadow system, and the amount of effort that we had to put in to try to learn the system and then make revisions to it quickly exceeded the cost of buying an off-the-shelf HR system in the first place. So looking at a total cost of ownership scenario is particularly important. And then sources and uses. This is something you'll look at in your on a very small basis on your IT projects. And here you're taking a look at what are all of the expenses where you're going to spend money in terms of capital and operating or one-time and recurring costs, and then where's that coming from? Is it money that's invested from the senior management team? Is it coming from the project's budget? Is it something that we're looking to pay for out of savings? Where are the sources? And the sources need to equal, the uses rather, need to equal the sources to in fact show that the project is paid for. You can read more about this in Investopedia. Excuse me, and there's some other sources as well in the notes section of the slides. So here's a typical break-even type of analysis where we have a revenue line for this project, which was developing a product or a service that was sold to customers or rented to customers. So it starts to generate revenue after the project launches. And then there are fixed costs, things that were expended in order to develop this system. There are variable costs, and those are typically related to the number of products that are sold. So this may be support costs, for example, and other related costs that vary with the size of the sales. And the break-even point is when the variable cost, and this is a cumulative variable plus fixed cost, crosses the revenue line. Okay, I'll pause there and think of questions that come up on financial management and send me an email about them if they do. But let's shift gears now and go into risk. So we'll start with a definition of risk. And this is a probability that something bad's going to happen caused by either external or internal weaknesses, and that could be avoided through preemptive action, or what's often known as risk mitigation. IT risk can be represented by this formula of the threat times the vulnerability times the asset. So how valuable is the asset, the equipment, the system? How big is that weakness? Small, medium, large, we would typically look at. And then threat, we would look at in terms of likelihood that something was going to go wrong. Was that a high, medium, or low as well? You can read more about these in the Business Dictionary, and Wikipedia actually has a good article on IT risk management also. So when do we assess the IT risks? When do we figure out what IT risks that we have and what we're going to do about it? There's an annual financial audit that's done that are required for organizations, typically by law, certainly by practice, and usually it is an audit committee of the board of directors It needs to be a committee that is managed separately from the treasurer, who may be a member of the board. And they come back because they need to have an independent assessment of the organization's finances, and they will test various transactions and various financial records. And they have 3 levels of findings that they come back with in their report. There's the red, or the major material risks that require immediate attention, or certainly highest priority attention. Amber, which are minor, but they could become serious over time. And then green were more observations, and that we still had to address, but might be on hold for a while. So IT management needed to respond to this report and say what was going to be done for each of these risks. How we were going to ensure that those risks were removed, so the next audit that was done in the subsequent year would show, in fact, that they were gone. So let me pause for a intermission, if you will, an intermission story here that I think illustrates an important concept, and that's the red button party. And this is the takeaway from this is going to be, well, so how do you avoid this defensive mode of saying, well, an audit committee is coming in just to find anything that's wrong with my IT operation, and therefore, it's a very unfriendly activity. How can we turn that around? So at Toyota, they have been rated for a long time as a company that has high quality, very good repair history on their cars. And so finding flaws has become particularly difficult to do. And they have a practice that anyone on the Toyota assembly line can stop the line if they notice a problem. So if there's a problem or a defect, somebody can stop the line, and I sort of envision there being a red button that they could push that would cause everything to stop. That was probably located in a number of places on the assembly line across the factory floor. And I imagined alarm bells, sounding, and the line screeching to a halt. But what happened next was the surprise. They threw a party. And you say, well, wait a minute, they discovered a problem, they stopped the assembly line, which stopped production, and then they threw a party. Why? Well, it represented a rare opportunity that they could improve the quality yet another notch. And so they could take a near perfect car, and in ways that they may have missed otherwise, they could up the quality yet again, which was, in fact, cause for celebration. And so if you look at an audit, the finance audit in your organization and the IT audit, which is part of that, as an opportunity to improve an already good IT department and an opportunity to make things even better, you can embrace that, that scrutiny that auditors bring as an occasion to change for the good and not discover the bad. And as a matter of fact, we would work closely with the auditors for identifying problems that we believe needed addressing in the organization. And so having that part of the auditor's report meant, in fact, that they would get the visibility and attention organization-wide to be addressed. So that was turning, in fact, the audit into a positive management tool. So, in fact, we would say even that risks are your friends. From 2 aspects. If you're not taking enough risks, your organization is going to be stagnating. You're not going to be innovating. But if you state a problem in terms of risks, people in organizations can't avoid it. Senior management cannot avoid it. So the saying that we operated under was never waste a good audit. Again, an audit was an opportunity to get problems addressed and fixed that might otherwise not get funded or budgeted. So if we look at the Red Cross risk register, this shows some of the sources that we looked at. There were a variety of audits There were penetration tests, which is what pen tests are on the left-hand side. These were companies we would hire to break into our systems and to try to discover where there were vulnerabilities and to test those. We would have different consulting companies that would come and do audits, so KPMG, Price Waterhouse. And then the blue area on the right was we in the management team in the IT group would look at what risks that we believed needed to be addressed. Some of these, in fact, may be strategic risks, and so we would highlight those. And then the types of risks we would categorize on another level. Was this operational risks, which were the largest category? They were strategic risks, procurement, or financial risks, or other. And a risk tolerance framework, a typical way to look at this is if you identify each of your risks and ask, how likely is this to happen, which is the x-axis here, and then how much impact would it have if it did happen? So the impact versus likelihood assessment is an important way of classifying your risks in terms of the ones in the upper right-hand corner that have a high likelihood and high impact. Those are the ones that you need to avoid and address immediately. But those that have a low impact and a low likelihood, in the bottom left-hand corner, you would just accept. And when we had to write our management letter back in response to the audit, we would indicate the items that we were accepting as reasonable risks. Now, this chart was one that we developed in the IT department, and we presented this to the audit committee of the board of directors. They loved this chart. What this showed was we had likelihood versus impact, so just like on the previous slide. We used 3 levels here of low, medium, and high. We used a bunch of color coding. And so each of the risks we had numbered on our risk register were mapped onto this. And what we said was the red area in the upper right, we had 2 risks in that area. That had to be addressed immediately. And then we had a bunch that were in the orange area that were next in line to be addressed and that we needed to have on our project list and in our budget to handle. But that items that were then next in line, the yellow, but the ones that are in green, we decided that we were going to defer. Those we're not going to spend money and time addressing at this point, but we're going to keep an eye on them to see whether, in fact, that these increased. And so we called this the priority risk frontier, the line that was drawn through this diagram. And we basically said to the audit committee, so we're addressing in the next year the things above the line, and we're not addressing the things below the line. And they agreed with that approach. And then if we go back to Bill's table again, this, in fact, maps the business risks to each of the IT systems and opens then the discussions for what controls or mitigations they're going to put in place to address each of those risks. So this is responding in a different way to the audit they had in the Phoenix project, where they're doing it from a very high-level strategic goals approach, which is, I think, a wise path to take. Okay, we'll pause there. I think if you have any questions about risks, and send me an email or a note if you do. I'd be happy to talk further about that. Okay, so let's talk about security now. This sort of entertaining cartoon, it sort of makes the point that security gurus, there's a strong demand for them, and there's 2 ways you can get there. You can either go through 20 years of experience and practice on the left-hand side, or you can have been a criminal and get hired because you know how to break into things, and you become a highly paid security consultant. And the joke here is it takes 20 years to do it the right way and 2 years to do it the wrong way. And I'm not recommending that anybody take the approach on the right, but one of the things it does recognize is that looking to the people who have broken into your systems or broken into other systems and understanding how they did it or how they would go about it becomes a very powerful tool in addressing risks in an organization and staying on top of what are the latest techniques and which organizations and which techniques became the harder to crack became a rather strategic way to take a look at security. So tongue-in-cheek on this chart, but it makes a good point. Their biggest data breaches in the 21st century, so this is one of the article that we read and a chart that was in it. And in the past 10 years, and I looked at the 2019 version of this just the other day, and it hasn't changed. Yahoo is still by far the biggest breach that's occurred. Now, of course, that begs the question. Okay, so if there's a breach, and there's that, Yahoo 3 billion, IDs and passwords were compromised. What does this cost an organization? Is there a way to estimate that? And so Deloitte, one of the accounting consulting firms, took a look at they looked at a couple of case studies in their report, and one company they looked at was a company that was in the health sector, and that a laptop had been stolen, and it had on it 2.8 million health information records, and the compromise was revealed 5 days after the laptop was stolen, when they were notified by a corporate client, because some of the employees had been listed on dark websites. That total cost that they estimated for this breach, 1.68 billion with a B, for that. So these, in fact, are material, costs, and we'll take a look now at what the components of that are. And so Deloitte broke it down in terms of above the surface costs and below the surface costs. So again, similar to the iceberg analogy, what are the costs for the things that are above the waterline and those below the waterline that are less apparent. And here you can see 59 million are above the costs, above the surface costs related to this. So you can see attorney fees and litigation, as the light blue as an example, notifying all the customers, that's the dark blue, offering protection to the customers after the breach, like providing them with cybersecurity checking software, which was a cost, and sending it to the customers. That was probably one of the biggest components here, 21 million in the red. And so this just shows the different types of categories here that, an IT manager typically wouldn't think of. Public relation and crisis communications, for example, is a cost in terms of the purple here. And then below the surface, quite a few items here, increases in insurance premiums, for example, lost value of customer relationships. So customers, that start to leave the organization because of what happened. And then lost contract revenue associated with that is the largest component here, 830 million in this estimate. And then also notice the devaluation of the trade name. So brand damage has a cost associated. In this case, 230 million was the estimate by Deloitte. These are big numbers. And so, data breaches and security flaws in an organization with respect to IT are big deals. So what can you do to protect against those types of things? There are a number of strategies in terms of having different program elements, more of a proactive approach to security controls, understanding and monitoring your environment. So these were things that we did at Save the Children and the International Red Cross in terms of adding intrusion detection to pick up patterns of of malicious use and in our various systems. And AI has been used more frequently in recent years to look for those patterns of misuse across an IT organization. And then being prepared, for response, having a plan to respond to this, or what we call in crisis informatics that resiliency or bounce back factor. So how do you bounce back from the shock of a major breach like this? And communicating about it is an important aspect. So one of the things to look at security, and because this is related to the argument that Eric and John are having in the Phoenix project, is that identifying risks and spending a large amount of money to address those risks needs to be balanced off against the cost of the security breaches. So what it actually costs an organization is balanced off against what the cost of the countermeasures are on the left-hand side of this, and you're trying to optimize something at the middle here. Very similar to automobile insurance. So when you choose an automobile insurance policy, you're choosing typically a level of deductible. How much of the loss are you going to pay as the driver, and how much is the insurance company then going to pay? Means that your premium that you pay per month goes down if you accept more of a deductible. And so you're trying to pick an optimal level for the car insurance. In the same way, if you approach security and response to security threats as an insurance policy purchase, then you temper your spending and the actions that you take. Types of protection, physical security. So we saw examples of those in the video that we watched from Google. Access control and identity management. So let's take a look at each of these. So on the physical level of that, I love this sign that actually appeared on a server rack. This is probably network. This is a network devices that are in this cabinet. And in case of a cyber attack, break the glass and pull the cables. So physically disconnecting the organization from the world is a very physical oriented response. Somewhat tongue-in-cheek. You hope you never have to do that. Having a high security data center door, we saw that example in the Google video. These are called dead man doors, where you have to enter in, and while you're locked in the center of this, they do a bioscan, and then you get to exit out the other side. We have access control measures that have been taken at University of Michigan. So as of January, everybody now has had to use the two-factor authentication. Thank goodness Duo is a very efficient application for doing that, but it's essentially it's an annoyance to increase the security level and reduce the risks of unwanted intrusion into the systems. Now, social media risks are more modern risks to an IT organization. There's posting of internal company information. Glassdoor.com is an example of that. There are inappropriate posts and tweets that can go viral. There's data privacy theft, and then data loss protection prevention systems, and you can read a report about those at Gartner. And so forth. I'm not going to read through each of these. Interestingly, when this chapter was written in Greg Smith's Straight to the Top, which is about becoming a CIO in 2013, so this is already 6 years old, they said, fake personas online, 83 million were estimated, and that number is significantly more now. There can be brand busting events that happen that change the whole perception of an organization. There's two videos in the links, one on FedEx, where a video was taken of a FedEx driver who pulled up to an estate gate and just threw the computer monitor, flat screen monitor, over the fence onto the ground behind it. Didn't even ring the bell to see if anybody was home, just assumed nobody was home in the middle of the day, and didn't have a way to get in the gate, so threw it over the the iron fence. And FedEx had to take all sorts of repair, restore actions in customer service as a result. You can watch both the video of the incident and then the FedEx video response. And the very famous one, the United Breaks guitars, I'll show you in an upcoming slide. Just watch that at your leisure. It's very entertaining, and millions of people have watched it. And ask yourself your question. You know, United's brand at the time used to be "Fly the Friendly Skies." That was United's byline. And at the time this incident happened, and this video went viral by the songwriter who had his guitar broken from mishandling and baggage. I went into a one of those rental car vans that was delivering us from the rental car place to the various terminals, and the guy and the drivers, was yelling out the different airline names as he was driving up, and he yells United, and everybody in the van said Breaks guitars. So it became the de facto brand of United at the time. All right, so the conclusion for today: managing IT, finance, the risks, and the security. It requires being on top of the details. Most of these are non-technical details, and being proactive, knowing your points of weakness and where you can be flexible as well. Okay, these videos, I said I was going to show them in a later slide. Watch these at your leisure at the links in the slides. This is the United Breaks guitar. Almost 20 million views now, and this was done in 2009, 10 years ago, and he's made an entire business out of this as a result. And then Eric makes this important comment to John, the CISO and Phoenix project, about he needs to have a mindset change. You need to protect the organization without putting meaningless work into IT, and if you can take meaningless work out of IT, then you're winning. And then again, the biggest risk is going out of business. And you need to protect the business and the processes that create the work product. So this was Eric educating John on this, and John has a significant change of heart, as we'll read in the last few chapters. Okay, we typically have QA and discussion. We ran an exercise on analyzing an IT budget, and the files for these are, and the questions for each of the files are on Canvas files, miscellaneous, so you can take a look at those. And we dealt just with the operating expense budget and 10 questions about that. So again, there were three handouts in this: an operating budget, a capital budget, and then a projects budget. And in our project teams, we took a look at each of the questions, and then we had a report out and discussion about these. The mid-course survey was then announced as well. So this is done by CRLT, which is the internal consulting group on learning and teaching. 30 bonus points if you complete the survey. They're anonymous. CRLT will be tracking names, though, for awarding points. I won't see names. I'll only see who gets points at the end of this, but I won't see individual surveys. Here's the link to the survey. The link is also out in a Canvas announcement as well. It's going to stay open until Monday after spring break, which is, I think, the 9th. And so make sure you complete the survey by then in order to get the 30 points and in order for us to get feedback from you. And very much thank you for your comments. This will be used to determine any adjustments we need to make in the class for the last half of the class. All right, ending with next steps. We've been doing guest speaker surveys, and these are the results of the surveys for JL's interview, actually, Don Proctor's presentation, Molly's interview, and then the data center tour we took on the 20th and Kevin and Brian's presentation there. These continue to be popular features of the class, earning above 4.0 averages across the board here. So we will continue to do those. A reminder about how you're looking at the two timelines and the two plans of action, or POAs. POA 1 gets you from from now to the presentation on April 16th, and POA 2 is the proposal and supporting report for what you're selling to the senior management team to persuade them to commit to doing it. And so the two timelines is there's a project timeline to get you to the presentation in POA 1 and a timeline to get you the project implementation, which is in POA 2. Okay, if there are any questions or issues with these, please drop me a note. Okay, next steps. Class plan, everybody should be acclimated to by now. The POA 1 grades have been posted. There are optional resubmits that need to be done by March 2nd. POA 2 is due on March the 12th now, so notice that's a few days after coming back from spring break, so that those didn't have to be done either right before or in the middle of spring break. The career role play and reflections, those are due by March 21st. There'll be more information that will be sent out on Canvas, but do choose your partner to do this exercise role play with, and then make sure you go to the spreadsheet that's linked from the rubric and reserve a time slot for doing your role play, which is the key part of that exercise. And then paper number 2, that's due on March 26th. We already have a volunteer. Van is doing the next set of readings. Thank you. I'm in Ann Arbor for the spring break, available from email. Otherwise, please do enjoy your spring break. So we had a little bit of time for team planning. Teams met and discussed at the end of the class. And that's it for today. So signing off for week 8, and I look forward to seeing you after the break. Good day.